Alright, so this is an example of a game I played today against a good friend of mine. Uh, so this game ended up not turning so well for him. This was a blitz game, so he didn't really have a lot of time to think, but he did end up screwing up pretty badly towards the end of this match. The match only ended up being about 27 moves before resignation, and so I'm going to kind of put you step by step of what happened. So I begin as white by bringing my knight to c3, and he responds with e5 pawn. And so I move my queen's pawn d4 up, threatening it, and he decides to move his queen pawn to d6. I respond with e4, defended by the knight, and instead of taking, he moves his knight to f6, threatening this pawn right here. And so what I did there is I decided to take my bishop to g5, threatening the knight, because if he moves the knight here, then I take the queen. So he responds by defending it with his black bishop. At this point, I decided it's just best to take the pawn here, and double stacking my pawns and threatening the knight. What he does here is he takes, and from there I take with my bishop, and he takes with his. So a couple of trades there, still evened up. I take with my queen here, queen trade. Um, this is where Alex's first blunder sort of comes in. Instead of taking with the bishop, uh, he decides to take with his king, which is going to deny him a castle at any point in the game, which is going to be a pretty big deal for him. So at this point, rook to d1, check. He moves it out of the way, so I move my bishop and check him again at b5. So he defends with his bishop, and I take, putting him in check. He takes with his knight, and then I go ahead and move my f3 pawn out. So now that we're done exchanging pieces, he decides to develop his a pawn, looking to get this rook into the match. So I move mine, sort of pin the pawn down. He moves out his rook, and I go ahead and start to get my knight into the game. I also am looking to castle here at some point. He moves b6, threatening this pawn right here on the b file, so I move it up to protect it. And then he moves his pawn on the c file, looking to put double threat down. So from here, I move my pawn right here, creating a fork between the bishop and the rook. He moves his rook to attack my knight. I go ahead and take. Now, I don't believe this is the best move I could have made, because if he did decide that he wanted to make this trade, I would have to take it with my king, which would deny me a castle as well. But he decided to take it with his rook, and so I made the decision to move my knight to c3. He moves his pawn on the b file down one, and then I decide to castle. At this point, he opens up his pawn on the h file, trying to once again get his rook into the game. So I move my pawn to g3. He moves his to h4, threatening, and I move mine up to stop him from taking it and opening up the rook to take this right here. So he moves his pawn right here, for whatever reason, to g5. And so I move my rook back. Sorry, my knight back. And he moves his king down one. From here, I move my rook to d5, looking to double stack on the d file. So for whatever reason, he moves his rook to c8. And so I double stack my rooks. And from here, he makes a terrible blunder. This is the first of two that ended up resulting in him resigning the game. Well, right after this, he moves his rook onto the d file to protect. So that way, if I take his knight, he takes rook, and then if I wanted to take it back, he would take it with his king. But after I move my king up to g2, he decides to move his rook to d6. And obviously, this is not a very good move, because there's nothing to stop me from taking it, and he cannot take it with his king because it is protected by my rook. And so we kept playing after this, and he made it even worse. Another really bad decision immediately after, where he moved his knight out of d6, which was protecting his rook. Once again, I take the rook, and he cannot take it with his king, because it is once again protected by the rook on d1. He didn't quite resign the game yet. He went one more move where he moved his king to e6. I put him in check, and he resigned the game. An unfortunate match, but it was a fun one nonetheless.